The candles in the great chandelier of the King's Theatre guttered low as the first violins began their mournful tuning. Charlotte Ashworth, Marchioness of Rothwell, sat very still in the rear of the gilded box, her back straight, her hands folded over a fan of painted ivory. She had learned long ago that stillness was a form of armor. The Tun watched her even now, she knew, watched for the flicker of a muscle, the tightening of a lip, any sign that the marble mask had cracked. It had not. 3 years of marriage had taught her the discipline of stone. Below, the pit was a churning sea of silks and jewels. In the boxes opposite, dowagers lifted opera glasses, not to study the stage, but to study her. Their whispers were a living thing, a rustle of satin and spite that drifted across the vast hall like smoke. Is it true he has installed her in Bruton Street? She wears his mother's sapphires. I saw her at the Pantheon. And the Marchioness, does she know? Charlotte knew. She had known since the first month of the affair, when a laundress had returned a gentleman's coat with a scented note still in the pocket, a note signed with a single theatrical initial. She had folded the paper carefully, placed it in the drawer of her escritoire, and never spoken of it. What was there to say? Her marriage had been a contract, not a love match. Alexander Rothwell had needed an heir, a hostess, a woman of unblemished reputation to stand at his side while he continued to live exactly as he pleased. Charlotte had provided all three. The heir, however, had never come. 2 lost pregnancies in the first 2 years had left her body and heart scarred. Rothwell had stopped visiting her bed after the second. She had not protested. She was not a woman who begged. Now, as the overture swelled, the door to the box opened. Charlotte did not turn. She knew the sound of his step, the particular weight of his presence. Alexander Rothwell, Marquess of Rothwell, entered with the easy authority of a man who had never been refused anything. He was tall, dark-haired, with a face that had been called classical in its severity, high cheekbones, a hard jaw, eyes the color of winter sea. He wore black superfine, a diamond pin at his cravat, and the faint scent of brandy and expensive leather. On his arm was Celia Vane. The actress was a study in deliberate provocation. Her gown was a violent shade of crimson, cut lower than anything seen in a respectable box. Around her throat hung a rope of sapphires that had belonged to Charlotte's own mother. The necklace had gone missing from her jewelry case 6 months ago. At the time, Charlotte had assumed a careless maid. Now she understood. Rothwell's eyes swept the box. They did not linger on Charlotte. Instead, he guided Celia forward, past the 2 rear chairs, to the front of the box, where the velvet-covered chair of the Marchioness stood empty. It was the best seat, the seat that overlooked the stage and placed the occupant directly in the view of the entire Tun. He was going to put her there, here, in front of everyone. A collective intake of breath rippled through the neighboring boxes. This was not merely an insult. It was a declaration of war. Charlotte's fingers tightened on her fan. For a long moment she could not breathe. The humiliation was a blade, cold and precise, sliding between her ribs. She heard Celia's low, throaty laugh, saw the actress's hand rest possessively on Rothwell's arm, saw the quick, proud tilt of her chin as she lowered herself into the chair that had been Charlotte. A chair, Charlotte told herself. It is only a chair. But it was not. It was her place in the world, and he was giving it away in full view of everyone who mattered. Still, she did not move. She had learned that to rise now would be to lose. To speak would be to confirm the scandal. The only way to win was to appear utterly untouched. So she remained in the rear chair, her face a mask of quiet composure, her eyes fixed on the velvet curtain below, as if the betrayal were of no more consequence than a misplaced cloak. The whispers grew louder, bolder. She does nothing. She sits there like a governess. The poor creature, no spirit at all. Perhaps she is content to share. Rothwell took the seat beside Celia, his profile to Charlotte. He did not look back. She could see the curve of his shoulder, the way he leaned close to whisper something in the actress's ear. Celia's laughter floated back, bright and cruel. Then the door to the box opened again. The whispers died. Even the orchestra seemed to falter for a breath. The Dowager Marchioness of Rothwell stood in the doorway, leaning on a silver-topped cane. She was a woman of 80 years, small and fierce, with a face like a falcon and eyes that missed nothing. She wore black silk and jet beads, and the diamonds in her hair were old and heavy. Behind her, a liveried footman waited, frozen. The dowager's gaze swept the box. She saw Charlotte, seated in the shadows at the rear. She saw her grandson, his face going slack with shock. She saw the actress in the crimson gown, lounging in the chair at the front. Silence fell, absolute and terrible. The dowager took one step forward, then another. The tap of her cane against the floor was sharp, final. She stopped at the edge of the box, her eyes fixed on Celia Vane. And then, with a voice that carried through the entire theater, clear and cold as a bell struck in winter, the old woman raised her cane and pointed it directly at the actress. "Get up." The words cut through the air. Every head in the theater turned. Celia Vane's smirk faltered, then froze. Rothwell half rose, his mouth opening, but the dowager's cane did not waver. "That seat," the dowager said, her voice dropping to a whisper that nonetheless reached the farthest corner, "belongs to the Marchioness of Rothwell. Get up, madam, before I have you removed by the footmen." Charlotte's heart was pounding. She did not rise. She did not speak. She simply watched, her hands still folded, as the entire ton held its breath. The actress's face contorted, shock, fury, fear. She turned to Rothwell, her crimson lips parting in appeal. But Rothwell was staring at his grandmother, his expression a battlefield of anger and humiliation. No one moved. The dowager raised her cane and brought it down on the floor with a crack. Now, for a single, stretched moment, the box remained a tableau of frozen figures. Celia Vane's face had lost its theatrical confidence. Her skin was waxen, her rouge standing out like fever spots. Her fingers clutched the carved armrests as if the chair itself might be wrenched from beneath her. Rothwell stood rigid, his jaw tight enough to crack. "Grandmother," he began, his voice pitched low but strained, "this is not the place for such a display." The dowager's eyes, pale as winter frost, shifted to him. "You brought your whore to the theater and seated her in your wife's place, and you presume to lecture me about display." She did not raise her voice. That was the terrible thing. She did not need to. The words landed like stones in still water, each one precise. "This is the place for a great many things, Alexander. Among them the restoration of decency. Now act as a man of your name, or I shall act for you." The actress found her voice. It came out as a tight, brittle thing, stripped of its usual honeyed lilt. "My lady, Lord Rothwell invited me. I did not intend any offense." "You intended everything," the dowager said. She did not look at Celia. She looked only at her grandson. "Remove her." Rothwell's hands were at his sides, fingers curling and uncurling. Charlotte watched him from the rear of the box, still unmoving. She saw the war inside him, the furious pride, the social arithmetic, the dawning horror of a man who had misjudged the moment entirely. He had expected his grandmother to ignore the insult, perhaps to retreat into the comfort of the countryside and pretend not to notice. He had not expected this. "Alexander," the dowager said, and now her voice softened, "do not make me say it again." The silence from the surrounding boxes was absolute. Charlotte could see, in her peripheral vision, opera glasses glinting like rows of tiny mirrors. The entire ton was witnessing the Marquess of Rothwell being brought to heel by an old woman with a cane. Rothwell turned to Celia. His expression was shuttered, unreadable. For a moment, Charlotte thought he might defy his grandmother, might take the actress's arm, seat himself beside her in the forbidden chair, and complete his public rebellion. A part of her, the part she had buried long ago, wished he would. It would be easier to hate him if he were wholly irredeemable. But he did not. "Miss Vane," he said, the words clipped and formal, "I must ask you to sit in the rear of the box." Celia's face crumpled, then hardened. She was an actress, and she recovered quickly. But not quickly enough. The humiliation was there, raw and red beneath her paint. "My lord," she whispered, a final appeal. "Now," Rothwell said, and the word was a lash. Celia rose. She moved slowly, deliberately, as if the walk to the back of the box were a stage exit she could still control. But her hands trembled, and when she passed Charlotte, their eyes met for the briefest instant. Charlotte saw fury there and something else, a desperate animal hatred. Charlotte did not flinch. She simply watched the actress lower herself into a chair in the shadows, behind a velvet curtain, where no one could see her. The dowager, meanwhile, extended her free hand toward Charlotte. "Come, child, sit where you belong." Charlotte hesitated. She had not planned for this. Her strategy had been silence, dignity, the long game of appearing untouched. But her grandmother-in-law, with characteristic force, had turned the moment into something else entirely, a public vindication. To refuse would be graceless. To accept would be to step into the light. She rose. Her legs were steady, though her heart was not. She walked past Rothwell, not looking at him, and took the hand the dowager offered. The old woman's fingers were cool and firm. "Sit," the dowager said, and Charlotte sat in the chair that was hers. The velvet was still warm from the actress's body. She suppressed a shudder. The dowager took the seat beside her, the one Rothwell had vacated. Rothwell himself remained standing for a long moment, clearly uncertain where to put himself. Finally, he moved to the rear of the box, as far from both Charlotte and Celia as possible. He did not sit. The overture began, a swell of strings that filled the theater. But no one was watching the stage. The ton was watching the Rothwell box, where the Marchioness sat in her rightful place, flanked by the dowager, her husband banished to the shadows. Charlotte kept her eyes on the velvet curtain below. She did not smile. She did not weep. But inside her chest, something that had been frozen for 3 years began, very faintly, to thaw. The opera passed in a blur of arias and applause. Charlotte heard none of it. She was aware only of the heat of the dowager's presence beside her and the dark, brooding weight of her husband at her back. When the final curtain fell, she rose without waiting for assistance. The dowager rose with her. "You will escort me home," the dowager said to Rothwell. It was not a question. Rothwell's carriage was waiting. He handed his grandmother in, then his wife. Charlotte took the seat facing forward. The dowager sat opposite. Rothwell climbed in last and sat beside Charlotte, the space between them charged and silent. No one spoke for the duration of the drive. Charlotte watched the gaslit streets slide past, the faceless crowds, the carriages carrying the ton home to their townhouses and their gossip. She felt strangely detached, as if the evening had happened to someone else. When the carriage stopped at Rothwell House, the dowager remained seated. "I will stay at Claridge," she announced. "I find I have no desire to sleep under the same roof as that man." She did not specify which man. Rothwell stiffened. "Grandmother, do not speak to me until you have remembered what you are." The dowager signaled the footman. "Good night, Charlotte. You did well." Charlotte watched the old woman descend and disappear into the hotel's warm glow. Then the carriage was moving again, and she was alone with her husband. The silence stretched. Rothwell stared out the window, his jaw set. Charlotte folded her hands in her lap and waited. When they reached home, he followed her into the marble foyer. The servants melted away. She turned to face him, and for the first time that evening, their eyes met. "You enjoyed that," he said quietly. The accusation was naked in his voice. "I enjoyed nothing," Charlotte said. "I was not the one who arranged the evening's entertainment." His jaw tightened. "You expect me to believe you had no hand in my grandmother's appearance. She arrived precisely at the right moment, a convenient coincidence." "I sent her a note this afternoon," Charlotte admitted. The words came out calmly, though her pulse was racing. "I told her you planned to attend the opera with Miss Vane. I did not ask her to come. I merely informed her of your plans." Rothwell's eyes widened, then narrowed. You scheming little—" "I am your wife," Charlotte interrupted, her voice cold and sharp as cut glass. "I have borne your neglect, your infidelity, your public contempt. I have asked for nothing, but I will not be humiliated in front of the entire ton without response. You made a choice tonight. I made one of my own." He stared at her, his chest rising and falling with suppressed fury. "You have changed," he said at last. "No," Charlotte said. "I have stopped pretending." She turned and walked toward the grand staircase, her back straight, her head high. At the foot of the stairs, she paused. "Your mistress is still in the carriage," she said without turning. "You may wish to see her home before the servants talk." She climbed the stairs, and she did not look back. The next morning Charlotte rose before the sun. She had slept poorly, dreams of crimson gowns and falling opera glasses, but she moved through her chambers with a quiet, deliberate purpose. Her lady's maid, a loyal girl named Penny, helped her into a walking dress of deep blue merino. The color was deliberate. Blue was the color of calm, of authority, of a woman who had nothing to hide. "Her ladyship wishes to go out so early?" Penny asked, pinning the final curl. "I have business," Charlotte said. "Have the carriage brought around in half an hour." The day was a journey of small revolutions. First, she visited her solicitor, Mr. Barnes, a dry little man with spectacles perched on a thin nose. She had written to him weeks ago, quietly, without telling anyone. Now she sat in his dusty office and listened as he explained the terms of her late father's will, a will that had placed her dowry in a trust that could not be touched by her husband without her express consent. "The Marquess is not entitled to those funds, my lady," Mr. Barnes said, peering at her over his spectacles. "They remain yours, if you wish to draw upon them for personal projects." "I do," Charlotte said. She withdrew a folded paper from her reticule. "I have drawn up a proposal, a school for girls, housed in the conservatory at Rothwell House. I will need to engage a teacher and purchase materials." Mr. Barnes raised his eyebrows. "Does the Marquess approve?" "The Marquess is not required to approve," Charlotte said. "The conservatory is part of the entailed estate, but the income from my trust is my own. I will fund the school. If my husband objects, he may take it up with the law." She left the solicitor's office with a lightness in her chest. It was the first time in years she had acted purely for herself. Her second errand took her to the literary salon of Lady Haversham, a broad-minded countess who gathered reformers, writers, and physicians once a week to discuss ideas over tea and biscuits. Charlotte had attended once before, in the early days of her marriage, before Rothwell had made it clear that her place was at home, managing his household and awaiting his convenience. She had stopped going. She had stopped doing many things. Now she walked into Lady Haversham's drawing room as if she had never been absent. The room was warm, cluttered with books and potted ferns, the air smelling of bergamot and old paper. Lady Haversham, a woman of 60 with a laugh like a silver bell, embraced her warmly. "My dear Marchioness, I had heard you were indisposed." "I was," Charlotte said. "I am better now." She took a seat near the window and listened to the conversation, which ranged from parliamentary reform to the latest discoveries in vaccination. It was here that she saw him for the first time, Dr. Julian Thorne. He was not a handsome man in the conventional sense. His face was too sharp, his nose too prominent, his hair an unremarkable brown. But his eyes were remarkable, warm and dark, with a depth of intelligence that drew the eye. He was a physician, she learned, who had dedicated his life to treating the poor in the crowded districts of Southwark. When he spoke of a fever outbreak among the tenements, his voice was quiet but urgent, and Charlotte found herself leaning forward to listen. Afterward, when the tea had been cleared and the guests had begun to drift away, Dr. Thorne approached her. "Lady Rothwell, I believe we have a mutual interest." She raised an eyebrow. "Do we?" "Education for the poor. Lady Haversham mentioned you were planning a school." The word planning was generous. The school was still a half-formed dream, a sketch on paper. But Charlotte found herself telling him about it anyway. The empty conservatory, the desire to teach girls to read and write, the desperate need for a physician who might volunteer his time for the students' health. Dr. Thorne listened with complete attention. When she had finished, he smiled. I would be honored to assist. Health and education are branches of the same tree. A child cannot learn if she is ill or hungry. They spoke for another quarter hour, their heads bent together over her hastily drawn plans. Charlotte felt a stirring of something she had not felt in years, hope, perhaps, or the simple pleasure of being seen as a mind, not merely a title. When she returned home, the house was quiet. Rothwell, she was told, had gone to his club. She went directly to the conservatory, a vast glass room at the back of the house, filled with neglected orange trees and dust-covered ferns. It was cold, the glass panes fogged with condensation, but the light was glorious. She stood in the center of the room and imagined it filled with children. She was still standing there when the door opened behind her. She did not need to turn to know who it was. "What are you doing?" Rothwell's voice was sharp. "Planning," Charlotte said. "I heard you went to see a solicitor this morning, and then to Lady Haversham." He stepped closer, his boots echoing on the stone floor. "What are you plotting, Charlotte?" She turned to face him. He looked tired, his cravat loosened, a shadow of stubble on his jaw. The arrogant mask had slipped, revealing something rawer beneath. "I am not plotting," she said. "I am living. There is a difference. You are making a spectacle of yourself. First the opera, now this meeting with radicals and solicitors. The Ton is talking." "The Ton has been talking for 3 years," Charlotte said. "The difference is that now they are talking about something other than my husband's mistress." The blow landed. He flinched, his jaw tightening. "You will not speak of her in this house." "I will speak of whatever I wish in this house," Charlotte said. "I am its mistress, am I not? Or have I been replaced in that too?" They stared at each other, the air between them thick with unspoken wounds. Rothwell was the first to look away. "The conservatory," he said at last. "You are serious about this school?" "Yes. It will bring common children into our home. Disease, noise, disorder. It will bring life into a house that has been a tomb for 3 years," Charlotte said. "If you forbid it, I will find another building, but I will not be stopped." Rothwell's eyes searched her face as if seeing her for the first time. "You have changed," he said again, but there was no accusation in his voice now, only wonder. "No," Charlotte said. "I have stopped waiting for you to notice me." She walked past him, out of the conservatory, leaving him alone among the dusty orange trees and the cold, beautiful light. The ball at Thornfield House was the first grand event of the season's height, and Charlotte had prepared for it with the care of a general arming for battle. Her gown was ivory silk overlaid with silver net, the neckline high, the cut severe. It was not the dress of a woman seeking admiration. It was the dress of a woman who expected to be seen. The dowager had sent a note that morning: "Hold your head high. Do not smile. Let them come to you." Charlotte had smiled at that, a small private smile, and then followed the instruction. Thornfield House was a blaze of candlelight and music. The ballroom was a sea of silks and jewels, the air thick with perfume and the murmur of gossip. When Charlotte entered on the arm of the dowager, a subtle shift rippled through the crowd. She felt every eye on her, assessing, calculating. The scandal of the opera had made her the most interesting woman in London. She did not falter. She moved through the crowd with the dowager at her side, nodding to acquaintances, exchanging polite nothings. Dr. Thorne was present, standing near the refreshment table, his plain evening clothes a stark contrast to the peacock finery around him. When their eyes met, he inclined his head. Charlotte returned the greeting with a warmth she did not feel elsewhere. She had not seen Rothwell since the morning in the conservatory. He had been conspicuously absent from the house, returning late and leaving early. She had not asked where he went. She did not want to know. Then she saw him. He stood near the far doors, a glass of champagne in his hand, his expression dark and unreadable. He was watching her. She felt the weight of his gaze like a hand on her shoulder, but she did not turn. She continued her conversation with Lady Haversham, her voice steady, her smile intact. The first sign of trouble came an hour later when the dancing had begun. Charlotte was standing alone for a moment, the dowager having been drawn away by an old friend, when Lady Beatrice Ashworth, a countess with a face like sour milk, appeared at her elbow. "Lady Rothwell," Lady Beatrice purred, "how brave of you to attend, given everything." Charlotte regarded her coolly. "Bravery implies fear. I have nothing to fear." "Indeed, then perhaps you will not mind a small question." Lady Beatrice's smile was thin and sharp. "I have heard the most extraordinary rumor, something about a certain physician and long afternoons at Lady Haversham. One wonders what two people discuss so earnestly, so privately." Charlotte's blood chilled, but her face remained calm. "We discuss education, Lady Beatrice, something you would know nothing about, as you appear to have received none of your own." The Countess's smile vanished. "You will regret that." "I regret many things," Charlotte said, "but never the truth." Lady Beatrice turned and melted into the crowd. Charlotte watched her go, her heart beating fast. The conversation had been a warning. Something was coming. It arrived an hour later, in the form of a folded paper passed from hand to hand, a whisper that spread like a stain. Charlotte saw people reading it, saw their heads turned toward her, saw the delight in their eyes. She felt the familiar cold dread settle in her stomach. Dr. Thorne appeared at her side. "Lady Rothwell, I believe we should speak. There is a letter circulating. It purports to be in your hand, addressed to me. It is intimate." Charlotte's blood turned to ice. "Show me." He hesitated. "I have not seen the original, but the contents are being repeated freely. It suggests that we have been conducting an affair for several months." She closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, they were clear and hard. "It is a lie. I have never written you such a letter." "I know," Dr. Thorne said quietly, "but the tongue does not." The crowd had begun to part around them, creating a space of silence and attention. Charlotte saw Rothwell moving toward her, his face a mask of controlled fury. In his hand was a paper. The original, she realized. The forgery. He stopped in front of her, his eyes burning. "Is this your hand?" he demanded, thrusting the paper at her. The room had gone quiet, the music faltering to a stop. Everyone was watching. Charlotte took the paper. She did not look at it at first. She looked at her husband, at the rage in his eyes, the public humiliation written across his face. He believed it. That was the worst part. He believed she was capable of this. "You would accuse me," she said, her voice low and clear, "in front of all these people, without proof, without even asking me." "The proof is in my hand," Rothwell said. Charlotte looked down at the letter. She read it slowly, her eyes moving over the familiar-seeming handwriting. It was good. It was very good, but it was not hers. "This is not my hand," she said. "I do not write my R's like this. The seal is wrong. I have never used green wax. And this date," she tapped the top of the paper, "I was at the Dowager's estate in Kent on that day, attending the funeral of her late steward. She will confirm it." A murmur ran through the crowd. Rothwell's face went still. "Furthermore," Charlotte continued, turning the paper over, "this paper is from your own study, my lord. It is a stock you order from a particular stationer in Bond Street. I have never used it." She raised her eyes to his. "Your mistress has access to your study, does she not?" The silence was absolute. Rothwell stared at her, the fury in his eyes slowly draining away, replaced by something like horror. Celia Vane was there. Charlotte had not seen her before, but now she did, standing near the far wall, her face white as chalk beneath her rouge. She had come uninvited, Charlotte realized. She had come to see the destruction she had planned. "You," Rothwell said, turning to look at the actress. His voice was hollow. "She stole the paper from your desk," Charlotte said. "She forged the letter or had it forged." She gave it to Lady Beatrice, who has never liked me, and now she has watched the trap spring." She looked at Celia, and for the first time she allowed a small, cold smile. "But the trap has closed on the wrong prey." Celia's face crumpled. She turned and fled, pushing through the crowd, her exit a flurry of crimson skirts and muffled sobs. Rothwell did not follow her. He stood frozen, the forged letter still in his hand, his face a wreck of shame. "Charlotte," he began. But Charlotte was already walking away. Dr. Thorne fell into step beside her, offering his arm. She took it, and together they moved through the crowd, which parted for them like water. At the door, she paused and turned to look at her husband, still standing alone in the center of the ballroom. "I will be at the Dowager's house," she said. "Do not follow me." And then she was gone, out into the cold night air, leaving the ballroom silent and stunned behind her. The Dowager's townhouse was a fortress of quiet elegance, and Charlotte found refuge there. She was given a room overlooking the garden, a fire already lit, a pot of strong tea on the table. She did not weep. She had not wept in years, and she would not start now. The Dowager came to her after an hour, her cane tapping softly on the carpet. She sat in the chair opposite Charlotte and studied her with those pale, sharp eyes. "You did well," the old woman said. "Rumpled a great many feathers. The ton will talk of nothing else for a month." "I did not want this," Charlotte said. "I never wanted to be a spectacle." "No woman does. But sometimes the only way to reclaim your place is to burn the ground and stand in the ashes." The Dowager leaned back. "The question is, what do you want now?" Charlotte stared into the fire. The flames danced and flickered, orange and gold. "I want a separation," she said quietly. "Not a divorce. The scandal would destroy us both, but a private separation. I will live here or in the country. He can live his life. I will live mine." The Dowager was silent for a long moment. "And what of the school?" "The school will go on. He cannot stop it." "No," the Dowager agreed. "He cannot." She tapped her cane on the floor. "But he will not agree to a separation. Not now, not after tonight." Charlotte turned her head. "Why not?" "Because he has finally seen what he is about to lose." The Dowager's smile was thin. "Men are simple creatures, my dear. They do not value what they hold until it is slipping through their fingers. Alexander has spent 3 years ignoring you because you were always there, steady, loyal, enduring. Now you have walked away and he is terrified." Charlotte shook her head. "That is not love, that is possessiveness." "Perhaps, but it is a start." The Dowager rose, leaning heavily on her cane. "Do not decide tonight, sleep. Let the dust settle. In the morning we will talk again." She left, and Charlotte was alone with the fire and the shadows. In the days that followed, the house was quiet. Charlotte received no visitors except Lady Haversham and Dr. Thorne, both of whom came to offer support. Dr. Thorne stayed for tea on the third day, and they sat in the Dowager's sunny morning room, talking of the school. "The conservatory is yours," he said, "if you choose to keep it, but you could also lease a building in the city. It might be more accessible to the children you wish to teach." Charlotte considered. "I had not thought of that, but you are right. A building in the city would serve the community better. I know of several properties available for a reasonable sum. I could make inquiries." She looked at him, this plain, kind man with his dark eyes and his quiet dedication. He was everything her husband was not: steady, honest, without pretense. A life with such a man would be peaceful, but as she looked at him she felt no spark, only gratitude. "You have been a good friend," she said. "I do not know what I would have done without you." "You would have managed," Dr. Thorne said. "You are stronger than you know." Rothwell came to the Dowager's house on the 5th day. Charlotte was in the garden, sitting on a stone bench beneath a bare oak tree. The air was cold, but she had wrapped herself in a thick shawl and found the chill invigorating. She heard his footsteps on the gravel and did not turn. "Charlotte," his voice was hoarse as if he had not slept, "may I speak with you?" "You are speaking," she said. He moved around the bench and she saw his face. It was haggard, the skin drawn tight over his bones, dark circles under his eyes. The arrogant Marquess was gone. In his place was a man broken by his own actions. "I have sent Celia Vane away," he said. "She has left London. She will not return." Charlotte said nothing. She had expected this, but it gave her no satisfaction. "The forged letter," he continued. "I should have known it was false. I should have trusted you." "Yes," she said, "you should have." He flinched. "I have no excuse. I was angry, and I believed the worst because it was easier than facing the truth, that I have been a fool and a villain, and that I have lost you through my own doing." Charlotte finally looked at him fully. "What do you want from me, Alexander? Absolution. I cannot give it. Guilt is a poor foundation for anything." "I want a chance," he said. "A chance to prove that I can be better. Not because I deserve it, I know I do not, but because I love you." The words hung in the cold air between them. Charlotte felt them like a blow. For 3 years she had longed to hear those words. Now they came too late. "You do not love me," she said quietly. "You love the idea of me. The woman who was always there, who never complained, who managed your house and your reputation while you entertained your mistress. That woman is gone, Alexander. I am not her anymore." "I know," he said, "and I am glad of it. The woman you have become, strong, independent, fierce, she is the woman I should have loved from the beginning." He paused. "I will not ask you to come home. I will not ask for your forgiveness. I am asking only for the chance to know you, to prove that my regret is real." Charlotte looked away toward the bare branches of the oak tree. "I need time," she said at last. "I need to decide what I want. Not what you want, not what the ton expects. What I want." Rothwell nodded. "Take all the time you need. I will wait." He turned and walked away, his boots crunching on the gravel. Charlotte watched him go, her heart a tangle of grief and confusion. She had expected to feel triumph. Instead, she felt only a profound and aching weariness. The days stretched into weeks. Charlotte threw herself into the school project, visiting properties with Dr. Thorne, meeting with potential teachers, drawing up lesson plans. The work gave her purpose, a reason to rise each morning. The ton continued to gossip, but she had stopped caring. She had become something new, a woman with a mission, a woman who did not need the approval of society to know her own worth. Rothwell kept his distance. He sent no letters, made no grand gestures. But she heard from the dowager that he had been seen at charity meetings, that he had sold his racing stable, that he had taken to walking through the poorer districts of London with a new and uncharacteristic humility. "He is trying," the dowager said one evening as they sat by the fire. "In his own clumsy way, he is trying to become the man you deserve." "I know," Charlotte said, "but trying is not enough." The dowager smiled. "No," she agreed. "It is not, but it is a beginning." The winter had given way to an early spring, and with it came a change in Charlotte. She no longer felt the sharp, bitter edge of betrayal. The wound was still there, but it had begun to heal, leaving behind a scar that was tender but no longer raw. She had found a building for the school, a narrow, sunlit house in a quiet street near the river. It was not grand, but it was clean and bright, with a garden at the back where the children could play. She had hired a teacher, a gentle woman named Mrs. Bell, who had taught in a village school before moving to London. Dr. Thorne had agreed to visit once a week to check the children's health. The school opened on a Tuesday morning in March. Charlotte stood at the door, watching the children arrive, girls in patched dresses, their faces scrubbed and their hair combed. Some of them clutched their mother's hands, others came alone, their eyes wide with nervous excitement. Charlotte felt a lump in her throat as she welcomed them inside. This was her work, her creation. It had nothing to do with Rothwell, nothing to do with the ton. It was hers alone. Dr. Thorne arrived shortly after, carrying a box of medical supplies. He smiled at her, and she felt a warm rush of gratitude. "You have done something wonderful here," he said. "We have done it," Charlotte said. I could not have managed without you." He shook his head. "You would have managed. You are the most capable woman I know." They stood for a moment in the doorway, watching the children settle onto their benches. The first lesson would be simple: letters and numbers, the building blocks of a new life. "Lady Rothwell," Dr. Thorne said quietly, "I must ask you something." She turned to him, her expression open. "I have grown to care for you deeply," he said. "More than as a friend. I know your situation is complicated and I know you are still bound to your husband. But I must be honest. If you ever choose to sever those bonds, I would be honored to stand beside you." Charlotte's breath caught. She looked at him, this good, kind man who offered her a life of quiet purpose and mutual respect. It would be easy. It would be safe. But as she stood there, looking into his earnest eyes, she felt no spark, only a deep, abiding fondness, and she knew with a clarity that surprised her that she could not accept. "Dr. Thorne," she began, but he raised a hand. "Do not answer now. I did not say this to pressure you. I only wanted you to know that you are not alone. You have options." He smiled a little sadly. "That is all." She nodded, her throat tight. "Thank you," she managed, "for everything." He left to tend to the children, and Charlotte stood alone in the doorway, her heart heavy with unspoken words. That evening she walked through the park as the sun set, her mind a whirl of thoughts. The path led her to the old oak tree, the one where she and Rothwell had walked during their engagement, before everything had gone wrong. She had not been here in years. She was not surprised to see him there. He stood beneath the bare branches, his greatcoat pulled tight against the chill. He was looking out over the park, his profile sharp against the fading light. He did not see her at first. She had time to study him, the stoop of his shoulders, the new lines around his eyes, the absence of the old arrogance. Then he turned and their eyes met. "I hoped you would come," he said. "I did not know I would," Charlotte admitted. She moved closer, stopping a few feet away. "The park has not changed." "No," he said, "only the people in it." He paused. "I heard about the school. It is open." "Yes, the children arrived this morning. They are eager to learn." He nodded slowly. "I am glad. It is a worthy endeavor." He hesitated. "I made an anonymous donation. I hope you do not mind. I wanted to help, but I did not want you to feel obligated." Charlotte looked at him sharply. "You donated anonymously." "It seemed the right thing to do. The money is yours to use as you see fit. No strings." She did not know what to say. For a long moment they stood in silence, the sounds of the city fading around them. "I have been thinking," Rothwell said at last, "about what you said. That trying is not enough. You were right. I have been trying, but I have not been changing. Not deeply. Not in the ways that matter." She waited, her heart beating slowly. "I sold the horses," he continued. "The racing stable that my father loved and I never did. I sold it and I gave the money to a hospital for sick children in Southwark. I have been spending my days there, reading to the patients, helping where I can. It is the first honest work I have done in my life." Charlotte stared at him. "You, reading to sick children?" His lips quirked, a ghost of the old smile. "I am not entirely useless. I have a reading voice, or so I am told." She did not smile back, but something inside her softened. "Why?" she asked. "Why are you doing this?" He looked away. "Because I want to be worthy of you, not to win you back. I know I have no right to expect that, but to be worthy of the woman you have become. If that woman chooses to walk away from me forever, I will have no one to blame but myself. But at least I will know that I tried, that I truly tried." The words hung in the air between them. Charlotte felt tears prick at her eyes, and she blinked them away. "I do not know if I can forgive you," she said. "The wounds are deep. They have not healed." "I know," he said. "I feel them every time I look at you." He took a breath. "I love you, Charlotte. I have loved you for longer than I understood. I was afraid of it, afraid of losing myself in you, afraid of being vulnerable, so I pushed you away. I made you a stranger. and I destroyed the thing I most wanted to protect." He paused. "I will not ask for your forgiveness. I will not ask for your love. I am only telling you the truth because you deserve to know it." Charlotte looked at him, really looked at him. The proud Marquess was gone. In his place stood a man stripped of pretense, raw and honest and afraid. She did not speak, she did not move toward him, but she did not walk away either. And in that moment something shifted. Not a healing, not a reconciliation, but a possibility, a door left open. "I need more time," she said at last. "I am not ready." "Take all the time you need," he said. "I will be here, not waiting in idleness but working, becoming. And if one day you can look at me without pain, perhaps we can begin again." Charlotte nodded slowly. Then she turned and walked away, leaving him standing beneath the old oak tree, the last light of the sun fading from the sky. The Dowager's final dinner party of the season was an intimate affair. 20 guests, no dancing, no cards. It was the kind of evening where the most important conversations happened over soup and fish, where alliances were forged and scandals laid to rest. Charlotte had dressed with care, choosing a gown of deep emerald silk that brought out the green in her eyes. She felt calm, centered, ready for whatever the evening might bring. Dr. Thorne was not present. He had returned to Southwark, where a fever outbreak required his attention. He had written to her the day before, a brief, warm note wishing her well. She had replied with equal warmth. The question he had asked remained unanswered, and she knew he understood that the answer was no, even if she had not said it aloud. Rothwell was present. She saw him the moment she entered the drawing room, standing near the fire with a glass of wine. He looked different, quieter, more reserved. The old arrogance was gone, replaced by a stillness that was almost contemplative. He caught her eye and inclined his head, but did not approach. The dinner passed in a blur of conversation and laughter. Charlotte found herself seated next to a young baronet who spoke of nothing but his hounds. She listened politely, her mind elsewhere. Across the table, Rothwell was deep in conversation with Lady Haversham, and Charlotte saw the Countess nod approvingly at something he said. When the meal ended and the ladies withdrew, Charlotte lingered in the drawing room, watching the fire. The Dowager appeared at her side. "You are troubled," the old woman said. "Not troubled," Charlotte said, thinking. The Dowager nodded. "That is often the same thing." The gentlemen joined them and the evening continued. But as the hour grew late, a silence fell over the room. Rothwell had risen from his seat. "I should like to propose a toast," he said. Everyone turned. Charlotte felt her heart clench. She did not know what he was about to do, and she was afraid. Rothwell raised his glass. "To my wife," he said, "the Marchioness of Rothwell." The words were simple, but they landed with the weight of a stone. The room was utterly silent. "I have not been a good husband," Rothwell continued. "I have been proud and selfish and blind. I have caused pain to a woman who deserved only honor. I have made mistakes that cannot be undone." He paused, his eyes finding Charlotte across the room. "But I have also learned something in these past months. I have learned that strength is not the same as arrogance, and that love is not weakness. I have watched my wife build a school for girls from nothing, and I have seen her stand against the scorn of society with a dignity that humbles me. She is the finest woman I have ever known." He took a breath. "I do not ask for her forgiveness. I do not ask for her love. I ask only to say this publicly so that no one can doubt the truth. I admire her. I respect her. And I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of her, whether she chooses to walk beside me or not." He raised his glass higher, to Charlotte. The room echoed with the murmur of her name. Charlotte felt her eyes sting. She did not move. Rothwell drank, then sat down. He did not look at her. He had said his piece, and now he was waiting for her judgment. The silence stretched. The guests looked at each other, uncertain. The Dowager watched Charlotte with steady, knowing eyes. Slowly Charlotte rose from her seat. She crossed the room, her emerald skirts whispering over the carpet. Every eye followed her. She stopped in front of her husband, who looked up at her with a mixture of hope and fear. She extended her hand. Rothwell stared at it for a long moment. Then, very carefully, he took it. "You may call me Charlotte again," she said quietly. "Only Charlotte. No titles between us, not anymore." His grip tightened around her fingers. "Charlotte," he repeated, and the word was a prayer. She did not smile, she did not weep, but she did not let go. The dowager raised her own glass. "To my grandson," she said dryly, "who has finally learned that a woman is not a possession." The room erupted in laughter and applause. Later, when the guests had departed and the house was quiet, Charlotte and Rothwell walked in the dowager's garden. The night was cool, the stars scattered across the sky like scattered diamonds. They walked in silence, their hands loosely clasped. "I do not know what comes next," Charlotte admitted. "I am not the same woman I was 3 years ago." "I know," Rothwell said, "and I am not the same man. We will make mistakes, we will argue. There will be days when you cannot stand the sight of me." He paused. "But I will be there, I will be beside you, and I will never again take you for granted." Charlotte looked up at the stars. She thought of the girl she had been, the quiet, obedient wife who had suffered in silence. She thought of the woman she had become, the woman who had walked away, who had built something new, who had demanded to be seen. "I am not promising forever," she said at last. "Not yet, but I am willing to try." Rothwell turned to face her. "That is all I ask." They stood beneath the stars, their hands intertwined, and Charlotte felt something she had not felt in a long time. Not love, not yet. That would come later in its own time, earned through patience and honesty and the slow rebuilding of trust. But something close to it, something warm and quiet and full of light. "Charlotte," Rothwell said again, as if savoring the sound. She looked at him, and for the first time in 3 years she smiled, a real smile, warm and unguarded. "Yes," she said, "Charlotte." And somewhere in the darkness, an old woman with a silver-topped cane watched from the window and allowed herself a small, satisfied nod. The season was over, but for Charlotte and Alexander Rothwell something new was just beginning. Not a fairy tale, had both been wounded too deeply for that, but a story nonetheless. A story of two people who had lost each other and found their way back, not through magic or fate, but through the slow, difficult work of becoming worthy. It was enough. It was more than enough.